AI doesn't just work with us in a pretty seamless way, but it also changes us. It changes who we are. It changes how we think. It changes how we act.
Hey Weirdo, welcome back. Today, we're tackling one of the topics that is keeping up every leader, founder, and professional awake at night. And including me, I know I talk about this a lot, but we're talking artificial intelligence again. But we aren't just talking about which tools to buy or how to write a better prompt. We are talking about you. My guest today is Paul Slater. Paul has spent his entire career at the intersection of humans and technology. He spent over a decade at Microsoft, where he led global digital transformation initiatives and defined the commercial strategy for their $1 billion life sciences business. He has authored over 20 books, and in 2020, he left Microsoft to co-found BillionMinds, a Techstars-backed company dedicated to building durable human skills for the AI era. Today, Paul advises senior leaders on the human side of AI transformation. He is an author of a new book called The AI Ready Human and the host of Humanity Working newsletter and podcast. Paul argues that AI isn't just another tool, it's a fundamental shift that exposes weak habits and demands a new set of distinctly human capabilities. If you want to know how to avoid gradual irrelevance and actually thrive alongside intelligent machines, this episode is for you. Paul, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you today.
And I have to ask this question because I ask all of my guests this question. What is a truth in your industry that people do not want to admit?
I would say that it is probably that we don't know where this is going. And we don't know which way even the world is going. And we certainly don't know what our companies are going to look like, or what our teams are going to look like, or what our individual careers are looking like. So welcome to the adventure, because we don't know how it ends.
So that kind of brings me into how you started. You started just like me as a tech engineer, building out what you thought was best for humanity. Yeah. Why did you decide to leave?
So I left Microsoft in 2020. And there were, there often are when people leave companies, there were a bunch of different reasons, and I hadn't really fully figured it out until a few years later. I did leave to found a startup. And part of that was related to the fact that I was doing an internal startup inside Microsoft, and it was kind of a lot of fun. And I was like, okay, well, if I can do an internal startup, why don't I try doing an external startup? But there was something else as well, which is that I have always had, I would say, an obsession about I would call it the intersection between technology and human beings. My very first job out of college was teaching people how to use this brand new thing called a PC. I'm that old. And that was fascinating. I mean, many of the people that I taught had literally never laid their hands upon a thing that you could describe as a computer. And this incredibly impactful technology, they realized very, very quickly that it was going to change every aspect of how they worked, and many people were really uncomfortable. Within my first week, I had my first, what you call we call them cryers, almost like an ER doctor would call them bleeders if they go, as the patients come in. So I had my very first one in my very first week, and it's a 50-something-year-old man who's like, my career is over. I'm never going to be able to get this. I'm never going to be able to survive, all of that kind of stuff. And so witnessing that and helping people through that meant that I was unbelievably interested in that intersection between humans and technology. And that's always been there. But in about 2017, 2018, one of my primary jobs at Microsoft was being, if you like, a translation layer between all of this next wave of technology that was coming. So think AI, to a lesser extent, robotics, automation, quantum even, take all of that stuff that we were looking at in some detail in Microsoft Research and being a translation layer for the customers I serve. And as I did that, I got this very strong sense that the wave of technology that was coming, humans really weren't ready for it. And so I wanted to devote my life much more fully to that, to helping this generation or the full set of generations that are in the workplace and are coming into the workplace be ready for this wave of scary tech that was coming and that I could see the early signs of. Now, this is before, by the way, generative AI. People forget. A lot of people sort of tell this story of AI as though, oh, we knew that generative AI and large language models were coming like a decade before, and that's not really true. That kind of exploded, right? But even without that, you could start to see that there was immense. AI was about to become properly powerful. AI was about to have its moment, and that was something that for me, I really, really wanted to attack full time. So led to my leaving Microsoft, and that has led ultimately to me writing my book, The AI Ready Human.
Can you tell me a little bit about BillionMinds, your startup?
Sure. So say it began in 2020, and it was. I would say I've got a YouTube video that I recorded in 2020 that talks about like, oh, AI and robotics and automation, and they're all coming, and we need to be ready for them. And so that part of it is kind of stood up pretty well. We founded it with the idea that there was going to be we were going to produce some form of technology. We called it personal effectiveness software. That by using the software, just in the act of using it, it would make you a more effective worker, more effective human. I think we accomplished that. But interestingly, there's a massive difference between building something that works and building something that companies want to buy. And so we were in a category of one. Our software was kind of in a category of one. That's very, very difficult to break into. And so over time, we morphed, I would say, more into a traditional learning and development company. Not overly traditional. It was micro learning. It was, and we were combining micro learning with activities that people perform, so a sort of form of experiential learning as well. But it was all centered around the human skills, the soft skills that people need to build in order to be successful in this current world of work.
I appreciate that you started that so early on in the career. I've only just over the last year or so understood that AI is actually making me more human than I've ever been before. I'm slightly autistic, self-diagnosed, but I've got ADHD.
Yeah.
And I just like to learn, and AI has given me the ability to learn how I'm not being human.
So fascinating. There's actually a couple of sections in the book where we do talk about that explicitly. One of the things when I was researching the book, I spent time with probably a couple of hundred people to gain a much deeper understanding as to how they were working with AI. Because what I wanted to know is I wanted to understand, is there a way of working with AI that is better over time, for want of a better term? And when I say better, I mean holistically better. So not as in you'll get this bit of work done faster, but are you as a human being thriving by using it in one way versus using it another way? And what we found, I think it kind of surprised me a little bit. What I found is that it actually does make quite a big difference. People who, for example, are using AI to improve the quality of their work versus using AI to improve the throughput of their work, the amount of work they get done. The people who are using it to improve the quality of their work have a much more functional relationship with AI and are much happier about their use of AI over time. But then, to your point, people who use AI to consciously help improve their human capabilities, versus almost like stepping back from their human capabilities and being a slave to the AI. Those people who are using it actively to help them learn and grow as humans, they have the most functional relationship with AI, and they really enjoy it. Now, there is, I would say, a far end to that spectrum where it can become dysfunctional again. And we encountered people that were, for example, had developed intensely close relationship with AI, which they definitely felt was improving them as a human, but it was actually shutting them off from the rest of humanity. They had this AI friend that was so amenable that the messiness and ugliness of human beings became more and more distasteful to them. So there is an end even to that spectrum. But overall, people that were using AI to help improve themselves as humans were doing really, really well.
The goodness and the happiness of my AIs actually pisses me off, because like I'm just like, guys, I just want the answer to this. I don't even listen to my AIs. I just do what they tell me to do and then figure it out from there. It's not like I have a relationship with my AIs, because I actually have all of them, every subscription, just to make sure that I'm getting the proper information. But I actually don't communicate with them as if they're human. I just use them as the tools that I think they are. And then from there, I've been able to like increase my capabilities. So now I'm a musician. I'm writing a book actually that's going to give people tips on how to analyze themselves with AI. Because I see AI as a mirror. Everything you're putting into it, it's just feeding back to you. And this is a great time to learn how the algorithms are taking advantage of you, or how you don't have certain viewpoints, or you're missing data because of your certain biases. That book is still being written, but I hope to have it out in the next year or so. And it's just a matter of like, for the longest time, computers have helped me understand the world. And for the first time, I'm starting to realize that it wasn't teaching me about the world. It was teaching me more about the digital space. And now I'm actually learning more about the world and how I see it. Also, I like to read research papers, so it's great for that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things that people miss, I come back to the sort of, your very first question. Another way of answering your very first question is that I think when it comes to AI, we're starting to understand that AI doesn't just work with us in a very in a pretty seamless way, but it also changes us. It changes who we are. It changes how we think. It changes how we act. And this is really interesting. People started to think about this, I think, a little bit with social media, and they started to think about how interacting with social media was potentially changing how they were interacting with the real world. AI is very much the same thing. So it is changing who we are, and so we have to be thoughtful about that, and we have to be thoughtful about how we interact with it, conscious of the fact that it is changing who we are. And I'd urge people to look at something called the reverse Flynn effect. And there's something called the Flynn effect, which is referring to the overall raising of intelligence over time in society. And around about the start of the new millennium, we entered into a period of reverse Flynn effect, which shorthand is we're starting to get dumber again. And it's interesting to think about this. I want to fund some research at some point to see this, but my strong belief is that how we use AI can affect whether we're continuing to get smarter or we're starting to get dumber again. And the intriguing thing is that it's going to be on us as individuals to use it in the right way, because it's not like we're going to be told by the AI companies themselves, oh, don't use it the way you want to use it this way. They want the frictionless experience, which doesn't imply necessarily that we're going to get smarter using it.
I actually just talked to somebody about that. The friction is where you learn, and that's what you want out of anything. The more friction you have, the more understanding you're going to get.
100%, right? And the most of development in tech, and most of development in business is all centered around removing friction. So again, it's on us to put that friction back in and then use that friction as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Do you worry that the world is going to become like Idiocracy?
Yeah, I do. Now, I'll caveat that with the statement that I made at the start, which is the sort of like nobody knows nothing thing, right? Which is that I worry that it's a strong possibility, and but we can never know what the reaction to what is happening now, what the future reaction will be to that. I mean, who expected that a whole bunch of young people would be buying DVDs and vinyl? You know, I mean, it's like the world is constantly surprising us in terms of how people respond to whatever is happening in the moment. But I certainly worry that it's a possibility. And I do say to people that when it comes to AI, that if you're not a bit afraid, you're not paying attention, and that a not paralyzing fear, but a small amount of fear that causes us to pick the future we want is something that is healthy, and we should cultivate. So I'm not bought into this inevitable dystopia, but nor am I built into this stuff that you hear a lot on social media, like, oh, it's no problem at all because we've, every time a new wave of technology has happened, we've all just, moved up the stack and thrived and all of this kind of stuff, right? First off, every time we've done that, there have been massive losers as we've all moved up the stack. People who were in generations of productive and healthy work whose livelihoods have been destroyed. We just kind of ignore that because the economy as a whole kind of grows. But secondly, this sort of like massive transformational change has only happened 6 or 7 times since the Industrial Revolution. That's way too small of a sample size for us to be able to say with certainty that everything is going to be fine because it was fine the last 6 times before. That's like saying, hey, I tossed a coin 6 times and 6 times it came up heads. There is no such thing as tails. I mean, it's not possible for us to be able to do that. So I think that having the only logical forward-thinking way of viewing this future is that good things can and probably will happen. Bad things may well happen too. So if we think about what those things are, if we look at them square in the eye and say, okay, how do we need to change the way we think, we act and believe as individuals, but also what do we need to do in terms of pressurizing the companies and pressurizing society to make the right choices? That's the right way to think about this future.
You speak to the choir here because this channel is all about showcasing how people are turning away from the traditional goals of making money just to survive and actually are building things that are meaningful to their lives. Most of the people I've interviewed so far have gone away from the big tech companies, hating what they've built, and have decided to build something completely the reverse of that, something that they actually are proud of. Do you see more companies doing that, more individuals trying to fix things as opposed to big companies just taking profits wherever they can?
Well, again, I think I might be slightly contrarian, or at least probably throughout this interview, you're going to hear a lot of, I don't know, right? Because I think that's the only rational, that's the only rational way to think about this. In fact, I'm slightly obsessed at the moment by this thing from the Institute for the Future. It's called BANI, BANI. I've got a little for anybody. You do a video version of this, right? Yeah. So I'm holding that up on the video version. So BANI stands for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. And so what that really means is that it's sort of for people that are familiar with VUCA, it's sort of like the follow-up from VUCA. But brittle meaning we have these systems that potentially seem secure but are actually pretty breakable. So think about supply. Yeah, but also think about things like, stock market crashes that came a few years ago, or supply chain vulnerabilities that we saw during COVID, things like that. Anxious, as in there's a wave of anxiety, so many things. I call it the everything everywhere all at once world, right? As in we're dealing with multiple things to be scared of. I mean, the likelihood of nuclear war is as high as it has ever been, but nobody talks about it because we've got so many other things to be scared about. Right? I look back to the good old days in the 1980s where we used to sort of duck under tables, for the 3-minute warning, right? So but that's the sort of anxious piece. Nonlinear, meaning that we used to live in a world where it's fairly predictable that if you did A, then B happened, and then incomprehensible, which kind of gets at the idea that we built all these systems around us that are so complicated, including in many cases, software systems that are so complicated that even the people that were involved in creating them don't fully understand them. And ironically, LLMs or large language models and generative AI kind of fits into that category once you get deep into the architecture of it. So that's the world in which we live. We all live in that world. Now, if I get a little bit utopian for a second here, right? If you think about the nature of large organizations versus individuals who go off and do their individual thing, a old school large organization with a high level of hierarchy that is very rigidly run, that expects everybody to conform to what's happening inside the organization. I think that those organizations ultimately are going to struggle because their top talent can do so much outside of that organizational environment, right? I mean, with a relatively small amount of money, and we'll get into hopefully what a small amount of money really means, because that's very different for very different people. But for a relatively small amount of money and a paid Claude subscription, for example, or something like that, you can fire up something and create something in a very, very small period of time, particularly once you get into things like Claude Code or even OpenClaw or whatever it is you use, right? So there is that, right? You're going to potentially lose those people. But to me, the flip of that is the opportunity for these large organizations. If you could create a large organization of the future, doesn't have to look like the large organizations of the past. It doesn't have to be highly hierarchical. A very term organization implies, in addition to it being like a big company, it implies you're organizing a structure, you're organizing your data, you're organizing your management techniques, you're standardizing, if you like. We don't really have to do any of that anymore, right? I don't need a traditional organizing structure to function well as an organization. But what I do have is massive resources, right? So potentially what I could do is I could create something that is incredibly fluid, that allows everybody inside the organization to be unbelievably entrepreneurial, to go from an idea to $1 million business in a day, right? And then take advantage of what the large company brings them, which is things like, the brand and the sales and the marketing and all, and all of that kind of stuff. So I see a possible future in which those organizations become completely less relevant. I see an alternate possible future where some enlightened versions of those go, okay, well, come play in our space, because then you can take advantage of all of the stuff that we have to offer, but you can still be as creative and crazy and all of those other things that you would that you otherwise would be. So that's what I mean when I say I don't know, right? I mean, there's one way that goes, there's another way that goes, but it really depends on whether those large organizations can change their ways.
Very fair. And to your point, the larger organizations already actually do this in some way, shape, or form. If I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
Google has a sub company of like 20 or 30 engineers that their job is just to figure shit out.
So my last job at Microsoft was sort of like that, right? An internal startup, and that gave me some hope, right? I mean, we had a lot of freedom, a lot of ability to do what we needed to do, and we basically created a new function centered around clinical research inside the company in a couple of years, because the shackles were taken off. I can't begin to imagine what we could do now with the technologies that would be available for us today.
Well, I just speaking from experience, I'm launching my first app tomorrow.
Congratulations!
I have 7 albums on Spotify.
There you go.
These are things that people can start doing without actually doing a whole lot of extra work. Like I have a stack of songs that I've wrote all over my life, and now I'm just putting them into the engine and saying, hey, I want these beats to be with this. I make it sound like this. And it's just giving me more hope for the world, I think.
Yeah.
Understanding the tech side of it, I also fear that people aren't going to learn anymore. The only reason I am the software developer I am today is because I was forced to actually learn these concepts. And I worry that we're going to miss a lot of that when the junior engineers of today no longer have the senior engineers to support them.
Yes.
Do you worry that the next generation is going to have a harder time getting into this?
I do. So this comes back to the point that you already mentioned about friction, and friction is where learning happens. I was at an event recently to promote the book, and I was asked about this idea of how learning happens inside at work. So, apologies, it's going to be a slightly long answer, but I'm going to try. I'll try and make it as quick as I can. So, if you think about it, right, we go from traditional schooling, and still today, many of us that wind up as being professionals get at least a sort of like a bachelor's degree level through traditional learning. So that means that up until our early, in some cases to mid-20s, we go through a fairly prolonged period of time whereby the way you learn is in a setting that is dedicated exclusively to learning, right? So a teacher shares stuff with you, maybe you do some vocational stuff within that, but basically you've got experts delivering information to non-experts, and as that happens, you get some of those non-experts becoming more expert. All of that happens, and then you get into the workplace. And for the majority of us, once you get into the workplace, we shift from learning in formalized learning settings to a larger degree of learning by doing, and alongside it, learning by osmosis. So learning by osmosis meaning that you're alongside other people that are doing the same thing as you or are better than you at it, and you kind of naturally pick up from them, but learning by what they're doing. Well, remote work to a certain extent, but distributed work more broadly is largely killing that learning by osmosis thing. And so if you think about it, even if you were to be hauled back into your office tomorrow, and you and all of your colleagues were sitting in the same office as yourself, you're probably going to spend pretty much the whole day with the headphones on, working with systems and occasionally people that are halfway across the world. So you're not learning from the grizzled veteran in the corner who like hears you say something and then scowls and goes, I wouldn't do that, son. Or back in my day, that kind of thing, which we might find annoying when we're in our 20s, but we do actually pick stuff up from, right? So that learning by osmosis, largely gone. You have companies that try to replace that or deal with that through mentoring programs and reverse mentoring programs and things like that. It doesn't have exactly the same effect because it's not there and it's not part of the active work. The second thing that has really I've seen this now in the research for the book, but then also the research for my upcoming book, which is more of an organizational design focus as well. The second piece is the learning by doing and what's happening to learning by doing. And so to illustrate what's happening to that, I'll give you a specific example. Do you know anything about the German wine industry?
I know about wine, not the German wine industry.
Okay, good. So you know a little bit about wine, but and would you classify yourself as an expert on wine or just somebody who knows a bit about wine?
I know more than the average. I did work in a winery, so I know a bit more. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. But we'll pick that as an example. Let's assume that you knew nothing about it, right? Yeah. And I say to you, okay, I want you to tell me to give in 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to be running, let's say we're a marketing company, right? We're going to be running a sales and marketing and advertising campaign with this leading German winery. It's just gone into a partnership with a new distributor, and we're going to bring this to the United States, and we're going to help people and Canada, and we're going to help people understand the connections that exist between the United States and Canada and the German wine industry and how far back they go. So I say, you got 2 weeks, and I want you to come back and tell me what the plan is, right? And imagine that AI doesn't exist. So now, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, your solution to that problem would be to go learn everything that you could, as much as you could, about that industry. And you'd actually have to learn it. You'd have to pick up books. You'd have to go find, Jancis Robinson wrote a great international book on wine. So you pick up her book. Then you go into something that was more specialized about German. Maybe you'd even get an English translation of a German book because it was so niche and so specialized. But you go to it, you'd read it, you'd learn it, you'd internalize it. And then having done that, you would then come up with the strategy. What would you do today? Today you'd ask Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, and you'd say, give me a primer on this, and then you'd say, okay, give me a marketing plan, and then you'd iterate. What have you learned in the first case? What you've learned is all about the German wine industry, and you probably never forget it. You'd be in 20, 30 years' time, you'd still be like, hey, guess what? I know all about the German wine industry at a dinner party or something like that because I did this project, right? And now, today, it's as close to in one ear and out of the other as is humanly possible. And there's been a ton of research now that shows that the recall that people have of the projects that they do alongside ChatGPT is or Claude or whatever other one you want to choose is transient at best. It's like this stuff is passing through you versus helping you learn. And the bigger point here is that without realizing it, what we've done is we've taken two things that were built into the experience of doing challenging work, and we've removed them all within the space of about 4 or 5 years. And so now we're doing work without learning from doing work in the same way that we were. And so that does mean that the sort of, I get to grow just through the act of doing work, that deal is kind of gone. And so now that means we have to be way more thoughtful about the activities that we perform on a day-to-day basis. And are they causing us to truly learn and grow?
Very fair. Actually, one of my favorite parts of my career building applications was learning how to do the job the same way that the person using my system was going to be doing it. I know a lot more about the Ontario labor market than I'd like to know because I built their systems. How do people work past this now?
Well, as I say, it starts with awareness, right? And this is and I know that people always say that whenever they deal with a difficult concept, but it really does. And so that what in the book, I talk about I call them the magnificent 7 layers of capabilities that you need in order to be able to thrive in this new world of work. But I don't need to go through all 7, but the top 2 are resilience and adaptability. So I define resilience as being the ability to be able to cope emotionally and intellectually with change. And I define adaptability as the practical set of steps that you do when your work is different tomorrow than it is today. So we should assume that the world of work that we're going to live in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time is going to be radically different than it is today, and that we don't know how. And therefore, we need to turn ourselves into, as human beings, sort of like adaptability machines, right? The ability to be able to work in an entirely different way, do entirely different things. But then part of that is a disciplined set of activities that are centered around personal growth. Now, personally, I think it doesn't matter what that is, as long as you've built the habit of doing it. So in your case, for example, the fact that you're writing and publishing songs, that you're playing, that you're doing various things with writing your book, that you're
I'm also you've got a tourism coordinator of my town now too.
Yes, exactly right. That you're flexing these muscles actively in all of these different ways, and that you're learning by doing all of that is something that is really important. I would suggest to people, we talked about how you use AI being very indicative as to how much benefit you get from it. One of the ways which you can get the most benefit of AI is by starting to use things like OpenClaw or Claude Code or things like that. Because even though I'll use Claude Code as an example because I tend to use it personally, I tend to use Claude Code more. The act of building something in Claude Code, even though you're not coding in the same way that you might have been taught to if you did a computer science degree, you are still, and even though it's doing 90% of the work, you are still you're an active participant in that, right? You have an idea of what it is you want to build. You are tweaking and modifying what it is building. You're clearly in control of it, and you're gaining a window as to how it does what it does. It almost reminds me of my very first computer was a VIC-20, and we had a VIC-20, and then my brother and I had a Commodore 64, and we started grabbing these. They used to have these. Sounds crazy, but they used to have these magazines, and the magazines had games in them, and literally 90% of the magazine was just lines of code. And you would then read the line of code from the magazine and type the line of code in to your computer, and then at the end of it, you'd hit run, and it would play try to play the game. Except it never would. What it would do instead it would say error on line blah, and then before you knew where you were debugging code, right? And so it sort of reminds me of that, right? The activity of playing with something like Claude Code starts to use your mind in a different way, and starts to give you a deeper understanding of how all of this works in a way that is way more related to personal growth than something like learning how to write a good prompt. So those are some of the things. But basically, if I were to summarize all of it, I would say that we need to consciously go back to the things that were valued. I'm talking hundreds of years ago. Mm-hmm. So that term polymath, right? I think most people these days know what a polymath is, but if you don't, look up what a polymath is, look at great examples of polymath, and try to model your life on becoming a polymath, and spend at least 10 minutes a day. It doesn't have to be a lot, right? You can spend 10 minutes a day, but doing something 10 minutes that is actively stretching you, and doing it daily. Do that, and your adaptability will shoot through the roof, and your resilience will shoot through the roof, and all of that kind of stuff.
It's very fair. And towards your polymath analogy, I've always thought I was a polymath, because I'm always interested in learning more. That's just me.
Yeah.
Like even this, I just like to. The only reason I started this was because I want to speak to the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
I'm sick of the narrative, and I'm like, I just want to talk to these people.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, like, I'm not so much a coder anymore. I'm more of a systems architect.
Yeah.
But I needed to understand the base level code to be able to understand how to architect a system too. I worry that the coding aspect of it's going to be lost, and we're just going to end up in somewhere else. I do want to ask a question. So, I ran across several people who are so fearful of AI, not because of AI, but because of the people running them. What
Yeah.
do you say to that?
I think it's a fair criticism, but I think it's also a reality. No, it's just a reality. I mean, like it wasn't like the people that were in charge of the Industrial Revolution were thoroughly good folks. I mean, it's
Go read
if
Who Built the Banking System.
yeah. I mean, it's like life isn't. The world isn't run always by the good guys, right? So I think that um, the idea of sort of like, oh, if only the people that were running this were better people, is probably something that we've been saying since we've had the opportunity to say it. So I think that we have to understand that it is likely inevitable. In fact, I remember this is kind of strange, but like when before Facebook went public, there were a lot of questions about the power that Facebook would have. And so you have to imagine that this is, if you kind of sort of go back in the Wayback Machine, right? This is before Google were able to sort of interpolate as much as they could about us as humans. It's obviously before, AI knew everything about us, and it was obviously before, sort of
Behavioral analytics.
widespread uses of all that kind of stuff, right? So Facebook stood out, right? And the reason they stood out was because they appeared to know like everything about us in a way that the other companies did not. And so there was quite a debate about whether Facebook should go public and whether we should be concerned and all of that kind of stuff. And the bit of it that is kind of humorous was that at that time, Mark Zuckerberg appeared to be kind of like, I don't know, like a bit of a goofy guy who just wanted everybody to be friends, and they'd figure out how to make the money later, right? And I distinctly remember having conversations with folks, with friends at Microsoft, and where we're like, okay, so we do like Zuck, but what if Zuck doesn't lead it in 15 years time or 20 years time, right? What if the Chinese government ran it instead of Zuck? Or what if, the board of directors installed somebody else who's a bad guy? What would happen under those circumstances? So my point about all of that is that, like, you don't have to look very far back between some of these people that we think of as the bad guys today were kind of the good guys. We would always think about it in terms of what if they were taken out and somebody else was put in. But now you look at it and you go, well, no, what if those people just change, right? And without getting to homilies, right? I mean, like, you give people this enormous amount of power and this enormous amount of money. Even the best people in the world are probably not going to be exactly the same people once you give them all of that. So I think kind of complaining about that is not exactly pointless, but it's a reality that we should be dealing with. Now, the question then becomes, if you work from an assumption that the people who run these companies are not necessarily going to be good people, then the question is, what do you do to counteract that? What do you do in terms of policy? What do you do in terms of limitations? What do you do so rather than just sort of, I don't know, rooting for Anthropic because we think Anthropic might have better leadership, right? Instead of that, what do you do to put into place the regulations and the policies to curb their excesses and make sure that things are tilted towards the kind of society that ultimately we want? And by the way, people might say that's anti-capitalist. I don't know if it is or it isn't. The idea that the exact form of capitalism that got us here is the exact form of capitalism that we need for the next 100 years, I think, is pretty stupid anyway. But whether it's anti-capitalist or not, I would remind people that we have always had free market and regulations. We've always had both. And all we're talking about here is subtle shifts to that potentially.
It's funny. I talk about capitalism and socialism and communism and Marxism all over X all the time, because people are very much into the communist era of thinking now. And it's like the government can control everything. Being somebody who worked in the government doesn't know shit, and they can't do anything. So giving them that power really makes me fearful. But at the same time, I don't think regulation's going to help, because I can build my own model right now. I don't even need to run somebody else's model anymore. I can build my own. And I honestly think we're going to go through a superhero, supervillain era, to be honest with you, especially when we get into transhuman design and stuff like that. But I think we all just need to realize, like, we kind of need to just take every day as it comes and just deal with how we personally want to deal with it. We need to stop being very apathetic to these things, though. We need to actually start engaging, because I think we've seen over society being too apathetic that things don't shift in anybody's good interest when the majority of the population doesn't care.
I think that's largely right. I think that the one thing that I would say, I mentioned that I'm working on a second book. I'm actually working on 2 other books. So the second book I'm working on is centered around activities that organizations need to have. The third is more at a societal level. And so I've had a great opportunity to talk to economists and many people that are in government, people that have even had a couple of conversations with some leading scientists in the space, and then of course researchers in AI. And the book's probably a year of research away, so I don't want to sort of talk too much about it. But the one thing I will say is that my general thesis coming out of all of these discussions has been that we are probably at a point where we need to start thinking seriously about the various levers that we have, regulation being one, but not all, certainly not all, for all the reasons that you've said, right? But the various levers that we have that will potentially allow us to take our foot off the accelerator in the future. And that's my worry right now, that we don't have, we're getting, you hear an awful lot of you can't put the genie back in the bottle, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And to a certain extent, that is true, right? But what you can do is you can take your foot off the accelerator in a variety of different ways. Now, people talk about it in terms of, you take your foot off the accelerator by making it more expensive for people to build data centers. That's a potential solution. You put the genie back in the bottle by creating some form of a economic penalty associated with excessive use of AI models, right? You could do that, right? So, for example, we talked about large companies, right? I could say to a large company, if we could determine how many tokens are equivalent to the average employee, right? And let's say that, X number of tokens equates an average employee. Okay, if you want to replace an employee with this number of people, then you have to pay the equivalent of that employee in terms of the number of tokens. And that doesn't go to the AI company. That goes to a fund that is then paying for retraining for employees that are displaced. These are some of the ideas that some of the economists that I'm speaking to are kind of like coming up with and thinking of going forward. And the idea here is not to be overly draconian. The idea is simply to give us the brake pedal that can be deployed if we need to deploy it, right? And so that's the that I think is the most important thing, to acknowledge the fact that there are dystopian futures that are there, to give us the tools to allow us to understand that if we're moving towards that dystopian future, then now it's time to pump the brakes a bit.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm actually building some agents now that can help the older generations, just kind of bring them into the fold, because we're no longer having computers and technologies that they don't understand. We're going conversational, and the older generation really understands conversational really well.
Yep.
So I'm building systems to actually include them into the internet again and give them the information that they want, just in a different way that we're doing it. Because I think we're losing out an entire generation's information because they can't use the tools that we currently have. Let's build tools that can bring them back into the conversation, so we can actually understand their point of view and where things are coming from. I think
that's extremely important. Sorry, go ahead.
The more inclusivity in terms of everybody we can get on talking about these subjects, the better.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. The one thing I would add, though, is that I talked about the idea is that as we've gone through these waves, and we've looked over measures like GDP and so on, and we've said, oh, look, we've survived this, everybody's thrived, ignoring the people that have been left behind as we've gone through each wave. This one worries me possibly even a little bit more. And the reason that it worries me is that over the last few months in research for my next two books, I've gone from being a heavy user of AI to an extraordinarily heavy user of AI, right? So to the point where, for example, if you look at my Claude, I have the Claude Max subscription, the $200 a month Claude Max subscription, and I regularly max that out, and then I'm paying, additional on top of that. And what has really occurred to me is the amount that I can get accomplished paying $300 a month for this stuff is not 3x what somebody can accomplish if they're on a free plan. It's like 300x. And so we are at risk here. Even if we have these what appear to be like generous free tiers for people, of creating a new and even greater digital divide between the people that are sort of like casual users of this stuff and the people that are power users of this stuff. So I do want to figure out a way to help people across all areas of society, including older areas of society, to up their game and become sort of power users and not have financial barriers to doing that, while still acknowledging the fact that this stuff is environmentally expensive. So you have to figure all that out as well.
Yeah, my thing on the data centers is I honestly don't see the need for them, because my personal understanding of how LLMs work and things is the scale is great for the LLMs, for the large language models, but everything you want to do is going to be an SLM. It's going to be capable of running on your computer, or it's going to be SLM clusters that don't need extensive data centers to do everything. It just needs an internet connection. But we're not there yet, and I worry that the corporations are going to build all these data centers, and then they're not going to be used at all, and then just going to ruin the environment for no reason. But I really do think this is the best time to get the generations that don't understand this technology onboarded. One of the other tools I'm trying to build out is like a spam agent. Essentially, you give your agent's details, and it parses through what it can actually send to you. Because a lot of the fear is, I'm going to click a link that's going to take my banking information. If you had a little bit of a protective barrier between you and your email address, you might have a little bit more understanding and more willingness to seek things out, see things differently. But these are all just from my mind. I'm just starting to develop these things now. They're nowhere near ready. I hope to at one time. Do you think we're in a singularity? Sorry.
Oh, man, I love the question. So, however, I want you to define what you mean by it first, because there are different people think of that differently. So define what you mean by it, and then I'll answer it.
So the singularity is the exponential scale of when we started the tech to how it's propagating. We're in this cycle where we're exponentially changing daily now, not even monthly, not
Yeah.
even weekly.
Yeah.
We're daily now, and it's only going to get faster from here. The end is where we are basically, the computer is as intelligent as we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think we're in that cycle?
I think we're close. So the movie that that I enjoyed recently, just because it explores, is Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die.
Love that movie.
So yeah, so it's funny. It's it's a bit like, I don't know. It's there's a lot of allegory in that. It's almost like the Animal Farm of our, like, nobody's watched it. Hardly anybody's watched this movie, but it's sort of almost like Animal Farm, right? You can enjoy it on one level, but if you know this industry, then you know that it's really talking about singularity. So I tend to think of it as kind of where we started our conversation, which is that I see multiple futures that are, they're not equally possible, but they're certainly possible, or appear possible, given time's arrow, as it were. Now, I do think that it is possible. We're going to get super philosophical here, but I do think that it is possible that it is inevitable that we are on our way to a future, an AGI future, where we become irrelevant. I think it's possible that is inevitable, if that makes sense. So I'm looking forward to all these futures right now seem possible, but I think it's possible that we could, like, the machine overlords could look back on this and go, it always ends this way. And there's a body of science right now that is related to the Drake equation, and to questions as to why we haven't seen alien life forms, assuming that we haven't, right? There's obviously this group of people that believe that we have, right, and that they're living among us, but I'm assuming that we haven't, right? There's this body of science that looks at it and goes, you know what? This is kind of weird. We live in everywhere we look, we see Earth-like planets in Goldilocks zones, and yet we're not all chatting to aliens. Why is that, right? And there's a body of thought that says the reason that is because they're among us, but they've reached such a level of communication that it's beyond our ability to be able to discern it, and they don't care about us because we're irrelevant. There's that version. There's a version of it where you look at it and go, we're all, the conditions that we have here on Earth are impossibly rare and take a really long time to come about, because of course, we're talking 3-4 billion years just of Earth, right, before you get a true civilization on Earth. And no supernova explosions, no other things happen to destroy us in that period of time. So maybe it's just impossibly rare. And so even though there are a bunch of these Earth planets, only 1 in a trillion of them have it, and we happen to be, the one in the Milky Way that ever will exist, right? Those are possible futures. But there's a possible explanations. There is another explanation that I find interesting and alarming, and that is that civilizations have a lifespan that is very, very short in a cosmic sense. In other words, potentially, possibly, it is inevitable that once you build up a certain level of capability and are capable of things like nuclear power, and are capable of things like extracting immense resources from the planet in which you exist, and are capable of things like creating machines that are good at coding, so can ultimately create machines that are better than them and better than them and better than them, maybe it is inevitable that once you get to that certain level of capability, that you wind up killing yourself off. Mm-hmm. And so maybe we are a sort of light that is burning brightly right now, but will automatically and inevitably flame out before we get to the end. Now, I'm going to say this appeals to me. It's a weird thing to say that it appeals to me, but the one intellectually it appeals to me because it kind of maps to the sort of the universe itself, right? The universe, everywhere we look for the end of our universe, we used to think it would end in a big crunch. Now we seem to think it ends in sort of inexorable expansion that whereby we all descend into nothingness. But it ends, right? It had a beginning and it has an ending. So the idea of like us having a beginning and having an ending sort of to me sort of makes sense. So I think it's an open question, right? We don't know which of those futures we're talking about, right? It's an open question, but I do think it's at least possible that this is another thing that could kill us, and ultimately it probably will, right? I think that is now ultimately it could be a long time, right? Ultimately it could be a million years if we get it right. Right?
Well, we're already looking into life extending sciences, so
precisely. So ultimately could be a really long time. But I do think that this comes back to that idea of healthy fear, right? When we say, oh, we've had nuclear weapons and we've never blown ourselves up, well, we damn well nearly did at least a couple of times. We nearly did it in the 60s and we very nearly did it in the 80s. And we probably very nearly did it 4 or 5 times other times that we never even heard about or know about, right? And so, if you're a cat who's had 8 lives, and you're like, well, I'm never going to die because I got in this scrape and I got out of that scrape and so on and so forth. That's not necessarily a healthy way to think about it. So that's why I think about this in terms of being very, very hopeful about what we can achieve and the utopia that potentially can await us, but at the same time holding that potential fear. So if you define singularity in the way that you did, I think maybe, but maybe, but if I were putting money on it in a casino, I'd say that would be the chip I would put the money on.
My personal hope, anyways, is that it's like Star Trek. We have an intergalactic federation of planets, and until your civilization is advanced enough, they don't come to you.
Or there's a prime directive bit in there, and they're actually already flying around, but they've designed it explicitly so we can't see them because they've got their version of the prime directive. I could totally see that.
This is a great place to end off on. Who are you? Where are you at? Where can people find you? And where's your book?
Who am I? That's your deepest question of all. Who am I? But anyway, but yes, Paul Slater, and my website is paulslater.ai, fittingly, obviously. The book is called The AI Ready Human. I would urge people to follow me because, as I say, we've got 2 more books coming up in the next couple of years on this stuff. But go buy The AI Ready Human. Go learn more about me at paulslater.ai, and of course find me on LinkedIn, various other spots. And as you can tell, I love to talk about this stuff, so I'm always happy to carry on that conversation.
Very fair. I'll make sure it's all in the description down below for the audience.
Wonderful.
Thank you for listening and coming on. Thank you for coming on. Thank you to the audience for listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and to everybody out there, just stay weird.
Thanks for the wild conversation. Loved it.